Well, it's 10:30, and I'd like to welcome everybody to Brainstorming the Human Connection, a production of the South Dakota Humanities Council. And today we have McKay Thompson as our guest. And part of the reason is because we're entering the 50th anniversary of the South Dakota Humanities Council. And who better than a former board member, chairman, chairwoman of the South Dakota Humanities Council to give us an update and tell us about it, and to give us some insight into what the Humanities Council has been, what its goals are, and what's been happening with it over those 50 years. I think it will be a very interesting insight into not only what has been done, but what can be done in the future. So, Ann, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Lawrence. It's great to be back amongst my humanities friends.
Great. Well, I want to start off with knowing a little bit about you, so that our other co-conspirators can have an idea of like where you come from and who are you. So outside of the Humanities Council, who is Ann? Where were you born, and like how many siblings and all of that? The Ann elevator speech.
Oh, the elevator speech. I've got one of those. I was born in South Dakota. I'm a fourth generation South Dakotan, and we have a long family history here. And my family came from Scotland and England and went into Canada and did things like started the first Anglican church in Canada, first bishop, started a college, ran the Hudson Bay trading companies. They really were the settlers of Canada. And then we filtered down into the United States, South Dakota specifically. I have a couple of brothers. One was an architect, and he's since passed away with some cancer. We don't like cancer. I have another brother who's a realtor and in the Black Hills here. So I grew up in the Black Hills, and I have a love for the history out here, but I've been all over South Dakota. I lived in Sioux Falls. I went to school here and out of state as well, but lived in Pierre, the capital city, for about 20 some years, and have been a part of the whole humanities world, I think, since I knew first how to write and how to read books. And we have law in the background in our family, and that's part of humanities. And so I started a university center concept that helped the colleges come into rural areas. I've worked in the healthcare area, workforce development, and I've been in government. And I was a teacher and taught humanities in writing, research, mythology, short story, you name it. That's one of the reasons I got out of teaching. There were too many courses I had to teach. I have a South Dakota resume. What needs to get done, you just roll up your sleeves and do it. So I've had a varied background, but love it. I love South Dakota. I have roots here. They'll stay here. I'm very proud to be a part of South Dakota.
Okay, and we're happy to have you too.
Thank you, Lord.
But we need people who have that attitude of, find the need and fill it. Roll up your sleeve and do it. That's so important to have a society that is functioning. Is to have, the more people like that you have, the more things actually get done. That said, let's talk a little bit about the development of the South Dakota Humanities Council. Tell us about when you intersected with it, and what caused that intersection. How did you even come to know that it was and decide to do something with them?
Well, in those early days, the main thing that the Humanities Council was doing is sending out scholars to all the communities. and they would speak on a number of different topics. And all you had to do was pay $25 and you could get a scholar to come to your town. And so some of those things were happening, and they would usually be held at a library or something like that. And then I got a call from the Humanities Council. Mrs. Wagner was the one that was doing the programming at the time. And she said, we have the Chautauqua going through South Dakota, and we'd like to bring something to Pierre. It's about Lewis and Clark. Well, we have a highway 1804 and 1806 on the other side of the river in Pierre. Those are the years they went up the river, in 06 when they came down the river. So we thought, oh, that really fits. So I helped with part of the organization. We put up the tent. It was right by the river, and it was on, oh, I have to paint this night. I'll never forget it. It was a perfect summer night. You could hear the crickets. You could hear the water running. It was sunset. It was perfect shirt sleeve weather. So we're all sitting there in chairs or on blankets watching these performers. They were scholarly performers. Clay Jenkinson was going to be Thomas Jefferson at one point, and then in other Chautauqua, he would be Meriwether Lewis. Well, this night, Meriwether Lewis, and he would begin by being him. And he talked in his language. He talked about today, where he was alive. And then he would stop, and then he would answer questions as the scholar. So he's up on stage being Meriwether Lewis, and he says, this was the worst part of our journey right here. We lost our anchor. And he said, right over there. And I looked at the river and I thought, oh my gosh, this is our history. And just recently, someone had found an anchor in the river. And so he got really excited the next day and went to look at it to see if it could have been the Lewis and Clark anchor. I think they said it probably wasn't, but that was our history unfolding in our eyes. And we're not that old, as you know, Lawrence. We just celebrated our centennial. And it just was so impactful on all of us to say, we have a history here and it means something. It was the equivalent that night of someone walking on the moon. That's how foreign this land was to them. And then what we also had, and this is the part I helped organize, where we had all these workshops the next day where anybody could come to any of them. And I went to the one on art. And the pictures that they showed were our early country with, you know, the vines going up the trees, very uncultivated, no roads, no plats, no fences. And then there would be this Greek temple at the bottom that looked like it was in ruins. And I thought, why would somebody put a Greek temple in an American painting? And they said, well, let's look at our culture at the time and our history, the humanities part of this. And over in Europe, the art that was acceptable were the great things, where you painted only great things and only great people. And so to get the Europeans to accept our country and art of our country, they put those little temples in the corner to get them to try to relate to this new environment in the world. And that's always fascinated me. I never knew why they did that. But what we were doing is learning about our own history and a better understanding of the world. And then I had been asked to be on the Humanities Council because I have written and published with a New York publisher and have written articles and things like that. And it just wasn't the timing because we were into some big projects. And finally, I got where I could go on the board. And here's what we did. We started out in the Humanities Council from a participant where there were speakers that came out, and the Chautauqua was a big movement in the Midwest. That was a major humanities event every year. or every 2 years. And so what we were doing now is trying to start to expand. And Sherry DeBoer went across the nation and learned about book festivals. And we had to ask the question when we went on the board now, why does every state have one of these humanities councils? And so when I went to Washington to learn about some of this, it was after the World Wars. There was a world that everybody said all wars have been fought. There will never be any other wars. And in order to make sure of that and make sure that we keep our fragile democracy, we need to be communicating with each other. And if we don't, we will not have a democracy. If we cannot learn how to take our points, accept other people's points, argue with them in public, not create wars because of ideas, but create understanding, compromise, whatever we need to do. But above all, democracy needs informed people. They need to be reading. They need to have other sources. They need to make intelligent decisions. And that's why social media has upset this whole idea, because now you don't know what's true, what's not true. There's violence in the arguments. We can't accept others. You're an idiot if you don't believe like me. But until that social media, here's what we did in South Dakota with the council. We started having some themes, and we started having one book, South Dakota, where everybody could read the same book and talk about it. And a couple of things that happened. One was we had a Native American theme. Oh, what a beautiful part of our culture. And some of us have been involved in it, engaged, and we see the beauty of it. We see the meaningfulness of it. We had a discussion at the Multicultural Center in Sioux Falls. We had a panel of immigrants, of Native Americans, and it was packed full of interesting people. And all of a sudden, we had people telling horrible stories of what happened to them when they came to America, of stories that were good, where they were helped and understood. And no one yelled, no one demeaned. It was one of the most impactful public meetings I'd ever been to, where everyone felt heard. They weren't judged, they were heard. And it's when, as a new member, I understood what it is our job is to do those things that get a dialogue going so we understand. We don't have to agree with everything, but we have to learn to live with each other. And I will never forget the wonderful interaction without this horrible conflict. I'm going to stop here in case you have questions. There are other examples I have.
Yeah, well, I was looking for those kind of examples too, and because I think that they paint the narrative of why the South Dakota Humanities Council is important and what it brings to our society. Can you tell us some of those, what you would consider significant events during your time on the board, some of the things that brought people together, turned their heads, opened their eyes, those kind of things? Can you think of others?
Yes. During the book festivals, we often have public meetings, some big public event that happens in an auditorium or some venue that's large where everybody can come. And the year that we had the book, What is the What? It was about the lost boys of Sudan. Those were the boys that were captured, little boys, 7 years old, 9 years old, whatever. They were captured and being fed drugs, and they were expected to be part of the war, the civil war that was going on. and a lot of them had families already dead. They were orphans at that time. And what is the what? I can't even remember what that meant, but it was a story about these lost boys and how they tried to survive. And we had the author there and then opened it up for public discussion. Up in the balcony, we had a visiting group from Egypt. And of course, they were Muslim. We had then in the front row of the auditorium some of the lost boys from Sudan that live in Sioux Falls and their friends. And in the discussion, all of a sudden, several of the Sudanese people stood up and, oh my gosh, what a tall race of people, noticeably powerful looking, beautiful. And I mean, dressed to the nines, because this was their book. This was their culture we were talking about. And they were able to explain what some of their trials were. You could hear a pin drop because these were the very people we were talking about. And then in the back of the auditorium, up on the balcony, some of the Egyptians stood up and they talked about the fighting that goes on within their region near Africa and where Egypt is. And you could hear this international dialogue. And here we are in South Dakota trying to understand these people now live here and what's it like for them. And again, it was one of those pin dropping moments where it was so well spoken without anger, but everyone was heard. Another, we had children, because we decided, you know, children need to start reading early. The dynamics in our country are they're reading less. We wanted to impact that. We gave children books of their own. We were in the great big performance hall in Sioux Falls and at the pavilion, packed with kids, and the children's author on stage, talking to them. Never had they met an author before. And afterward, the little kids that came up to the author said, "This book was about me, and thank you. You helped me know how to handle this thing." And it was incredible to watch, and the dynamics of these children being engaged. So what we learned from all of that too is that the more we can have authors engaged with the people that read their things, that's part of our gift that we can do as a humanities board. So we have grown from a book festival that had a few well-chosen authors to, I don't know, maybe there are 30, 35 more. I'm not clear about where that is now, but oh my gosh, the people just pack in. They read about everything. So our culture is, another thing that happened while I was on the board is we asked ourselves the question, well, who are we as a South Dakota culture? You know, what makes a South Dakotan? Because we're different than the people in New York, often with the attitude. And I saw that, I suppose, through my publishing too. But what makes us different from California, Montana, Florida, whatever it might be? And so we asked guest authors to submit chapters. Were you one of those, Lawrence, that submitted one? Did you?
Oh, what makes a South Dakotan?
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought so. So it was an interesting little book. It got published. It's there at the Humanities Council. People can read that. And the other thing the council does now is they have books for book clubs. So you don't have to buy all the books. The whole idea is make culture, make humanities accessible. And you can get a pack of the books with some reading guides. And it has just expanded tremendously from those first days. And I think has become extremely meaningful. What has happened is that the Humanities Council now reaches almost every county every year, except during COVID. I don't know how all that worked, but I mean, I just have been amazed through the Speakers Bureau, the One Book South Dakota, the book festival, all the programs they have. Then they give away grants. And that is impactful in that it has helped, for instance, some of the reservations catalog their artifacts that they have, that they can record some of their histories. Little towns can record histories. They all sorts of different projects can happen with those grants. You apply for them and the council makes the decision on that. So I'm sure I've missed some things, but the bottom line is we need more than ever in this world a forum and a way to talk to each other about hard things, about the things that keep our world safe and growing and where lives are important and respected. And the Humanities Council has that. They get federal money every year. The federal government feels it's that important too. It's like a mini UN in every state.
That's so true. And it's interesting that the examples that you brought are prime examples of the kinds of things that will bring people together. And I think it's also important that we find a platform where difficult conversations can happen. I'm hoping that that's one of the things we can accomplish with this program, actually. And I want to get under the hood of that a little bit and talk about the mechanics of actually getting people in the room. It's one thing to have aspirations of let's get people together and talking. But as you've probably experienced, the mechanics of actually getting people together to do that who often don't have much experience in doing that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the, shall we say, episodes that that you experienced in getting that done?
Our book, we had one book, South Dakota, that was To Kill a Mockingbird. And of course, law is a humanities. So we worked with the attorneys in South Dakota to form some partnerships that year. And that's how we start to get people in the room. There is now a following of everything that we do, and that grows. But also to bring in newer groups, that's where the partnering came in. And they helped fund to bring in the actual actress that played the little girl. And she came to visit with us we had a public stage presence for her to come in and talk about her time as a little girl on that set. And, you know, she was nominated for an Academy Award. She talks about the night that she was sitting there at the presentation. They were going to give the awards that night, and she was all by herself, and she had a seat assigned. And some guy came up to her and said, "I've got more people than seats. We're going to need your chair. Could you move another place, little girl?" And so here is the actress that was up for Academy Award, and some guy just shoved her off and took her seat. and she said, you know, part of her dealings as the actress in this with the wonderful, I'm forgetting names now, the guy that played the main part, the lawyer. She said that she had kind of a rough home life, and that he really became the dad she thought she would always have. She became very close to him. And after the movie was over, she got pretty lost. She had so much fame, and the family wasn't sure how to handle it. And her life was, I think, not one of the best. But she talks about how he would read to her in that movie, and that's just how she thought her life should be. And Gregory Peck, that's who that was. And then the lawyers came in as part of the discussion, and they said, you know, this To Kill a Mockingbird, of injustice of blaming someone who happened to be a Black man that they blamed in the South at that time. It's also about a great father. The movie is more than just the trial. What a great father, how he taught his children to not discriminate, to look at the human being. And Bo, who had mental problems and would hide things in the tree, of how to accept him. It was a father that taught his children. And I don't think any of us ever looked at that book that way. But that's what the lawyers brought in. And so how do we do the mechanics? I'm not sure of everything now. Jennifer does such a terrific job with that, but bringing people in. But I mean, we had a book festival at Deadwood, and we did, you know, the sci-fi books and the zombie books. And they were a group of people that did a zombie walk up Main Street that was part of the festival that night. You know, the directors have so much to do with the engagement, and the staff, which are terrific. Staff are just always have been great. And people just love it. I mean, they engage the whole thing. You don't just read a book. You learn about the people, you learn about the food. We would have different foods sometimes. Like when we did Mockingbird, we had moon pies, and a lot of people have never had a moon pie, and we shipped in a bunch, you know. So we tried to engage people in all sorts of ways. We did the Willa Cather book one time, and we had a stage presence of a reader's theater, and then had authentic music from that era of the immigrants that came into America. And Willa Cather would write about how hard they worked. I mean, they would go into town, they would clean people's houses, they would do all the work that nobody liked to work, but in the end, they owned all the land. They were highly successful in what they did. They took the long point of view, and they were some of the wealthiest, most successful families in America. You know, that immigrant grit that it takes. They'll do anything for that goal. So it just depended on where we were, but we'd involve the old historic stuff. We just tried everything. And that brought in a lot of people and a lot of experiences.
I want to open it up to our co-conspirators, as I refer to them, the people who also help make this program by their contributions, their questions, and their insights. I want to open it up to others who have experienced the South Dakota Humanities Council. Maybe you have experienced it in some of the same things that Anne has been talking about, or maybe you have had some other experiences. What kind of experiences have you had that have impacted your life, whether it's at a book festival or going to a Chautauqua or hearing a scholar speak? What kind of ways has the South Dakota Humanities Council impacted your lives?
When I first moved to Sioux Falls, oh, I'm sorry about that. I can't get to the phone, so ignore it. When I first moved to Sioux Falls, I went down to the public library, and there was somebody from the Lost Boys that was speaking. And that really opened my eyes for those that you were telling me about. And I had read that book. And that brought in, and I used to teach a course called Humanities in another state. And so much of what you said is, I just can't tell you how it helps to have that enlightenment in all of our world. And I just finished reading the book, Caste, C-A-S-T-E. I don't know if anyone else has read it, but it gives you some ideas of how we can do a conversation to bring that civil conversation and understanding. It really starts at the grassroots, and boy, do I appreciate any and all help that we can have. I'm in another discussion group, and we're continually striving to reach those consensus with people and how we can go about not changing them, but changing how we speak with each other. So thank you so much for having her.
Mhm.
I mean,
Thank you.
Pam.
Yes, thank you, Lee.
Thank
Thank you. Anyone else have some ways that the South Dakota Humanities Council has impacted their lives? Anybody else?
I can share some more stories if there aren't any more comments.
Yeah, are there, sometimes it takes people a while to get cranked up.
I have a
Morning.
question for Ann.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. The importance of this marketplace for our respectful idea exchanges and the value of the Humanities Council and the programs through it. We live in a different world than we lived in 20 years ago or 30 years ago when it comes to that, I think. And we are seeing the diminishment and even the destruction of the concept of truth and fact. And without getting into who I think caused that over the last 20 years, there were a number of people that I would say were leading that, and one in particular in recent years. How do you get past that in a discussion? And I'm assuming most of the people in this discussion have fairly similar views when it comes to presidents, politics, things like that. How do you bring a group together now where if you bring the other side in or the other sides, they're going to come with a different set of truths now than you might have or that we might have? How do you deal with that?
I think that's our new challenge, Kevin. I really do. I used to teach research, and I would teach them, you go to the primary source to find out the real thing, and you look at all the sources that you can, but you can't use that now to find truth and discussion because those original sources might not be true. And so I think we're in a time of turmoil about that, and there needs to be some work done. How do we teach people what is truth or not? I think families are going through some very interesting times, almost, with different points of view within families. You can't have a gathering and mention a certain person's name without flaring up. And I don't think we have the answers yet. I think that that's one of the things the Humanities Council should continue to explore. I know a couple of years ago, we had some speakers that talked about that kind of thing, but social media wasn't at the peak yet. And I think we need some new voices to do that because I haven't figured out how to talk to my own family about some of those things. So I don't see a thing there yet. It isn't enough to just say, let's just be civil. It isn't enough because they're saying, well, finally, we're getting a voice heard. Nobody's listened to us before. We want our voice heard. And I don't know. I don't have the answer. Although I'm working on the research part because I really care about that. And if you do a book or write a book, research is often a part of that. And I'm still doing some more writing. I don't know. I don't know what you do. Do you have some ideas?
Oh, go ahead, Ann.
Well, I was just wondering if Kevin has some ideas.
I'm on social media a fair amount and these days, and I don't know what you do. I used to make it my goal when I was with the Rapid City Journal and I had a blog that had a lot of traffic. My goal to take some of the people that were profoundly misinformed, unbelievably misinformed, and try to talk to them and try to have a conversation with them. And occasionally you would have some successes. And it's not that I have a, you know, a monopoly on what's truth, but I think I did have a pretty good grasp of what's fact. And that was what was lost. I mean, we used to argue about what facts meant and how to take facts and incorporate them into public policy. And now we just disagree on the facts. And in fact, some people will just dismiss your set of facts and won't even talk about it, won't even have that discussion. So I don't know what we do. You mentioned maybe new voices. Maybe there is a new generation of voices coming up that somehow will blend these disparate views, these contrasting opinions better than we're able to. But there's 70% of Republicans think the election was stolen in 2020. I don't know how you get around that. And neither do the leaders in the Republican Party, the ones that I consider to be the true leaders, not the others. I don't know how you get around that.
Well, it's worthwhile mentioning that in the Civil War, there were families on both sides of that too. So the idea that families are split down the middle and can't talk to each other, even shoot at each other over politics, that is not new. And so we should recognize and accept that. The other thing, if we talk about the truths, there are a couple of things that are important also to remember. One is that people have emotional truths. And when I say emotional truths, I mean, there are sometimes people have to believe something to cope. It has nothing to do with logic, has nothing to do with what we might refer to as facts, but we actually have to believe that to wake up in the morning, even though things poke us in the eye and tell us that's not true. In order for us to cope, we'll find a way to dismiss everything that says it's not. That is an emotional thing, and I don't know that there's a logical thing that we can say to that. That said, if we look for a logical truth, I think maybe we're looking for that mutual acceptance of facts. What are the mutually verifiable facts? So when we say facts, we don't throw in that mutually verifiable part, so that yes, you can have your facts, I can have my facts, but we have to dance together. And if we're going to dance together, we have to be listening to one drummer. Because if we're listening to different drummers, we can't dance. And we can say, look, this is just as most things we do. There are conventions. There are things that we accept so that we can, go down the road. It's like the difference between working metrics and working, the English measuring system. We can argue over those things, but finally the thing is the thing. So we end up saying, well, let's use metric. Everybody get on the metric thing, and then we'll learn that. And now we can measure things. And so when I say 5 centimeters, you have an idea of what I mean. There's that kind of thing. And I say all of that to say that this is the kind of thing, even, the book festivals, bringing people together to have at least an idea of what the other person's facts are, that gives us a chance. It doesn't solve it, but it gives us a chance. That said, Crystal, you were going to say something.
Thank you. So, yeah, I just wanted to say, with the South Dakota Humanities Council, I have learned a few things. Back in 2017, I worked on a grant opportunity to do a cultural bus tour in Sisseton. So I organized a bus tour, and we had natives and non-natives. One of the natives was one of our tour guides. And then we had a non-native who was our other tour guide. So as we traveled around the reservation, we got to hear two sides of a story. We got to hear the native side, and then we got to hear the non-native of what they saw of the land, and then what we saw of the same land that we all lived on. So that was a really great opportunity, because it brought two communities together. And even in this little town of Sisseton, natives, and it's like they call it the border town to the res, or part of the res. So we still don't really know each other as natives and non-natives. So we're still learning about each other. We have to live and we have to share the same community. So being in that bus together with, we didn't know, you know, a lot of people didn't know each other, and we learned about each other's history on a whole, it was a long day. And then we ended the day with a meal. We'd get out and we'd tour, and it was really, it was a really good learning opportunity. And then we had the second thing we had with that same grant was a water lily. We all got together and read the book Water Lily, and we had a book club, and that lasted a couple of months. But the thing with that is I was surprised because it was mostly non-natives who wanted to come and read the book. So we had a great discussion at the end of everybody's opinions. And a lot of the non-Indians would say stuff like, well, is it okay if I ask this question? How I always wanted to know this. And I said, this is your safe space. This is the place where you can ask anything you want to ask and not offend anybody, because we're all here to learn from each other. So, you know, and they got to ask those questions and they got to learn. We learned a little bit about each other. And, you know, to this day, we've created some really great friendships. So in our little community, you know, it's always usually us and them, but those two events really brought us together. And then there was another event that they brought some storytellers to tell their stories growing up. So my mom got to be a part of that. She, you know, was in her 90s, so she couldn't, I was there to read her story for her on the stage. And, you know, that was really nice. We had other people there, and it was just a really beautiful event. So South Dakota Humanities celebrating 50 years in doing this kind of work is, I see there's a lot of work to be done, but I like that it includes everybody, you know, and all the work that they do. And I just wish that I had more time to like get involved more, and or else either introduce my kids or my grandkids now that are getting up there in age, you know, and being teenagers, but to teach them about the art and the history more, because I think it's really, it's so important. And I think the South Dakota Humanities Council does a lot in that area. I mean, there's a lot that you guys are talking about the politic part of it and stuff, which has a lot to do with, you know, how people see us and how we see the white people. And, but you know, we keep doing these events, and hopefully people's minds will be opened up to the different cultures, the diversity of the state. So that was just my 2 cents. Thank you.
It's great.
You make some really good points, Crystal. And I think the key for me is that it creates the platform, because if we have a platform and venue, then we have possibilities. And then from possibilities, we can move into probabilities. But we first have to have those possibilities. And you had a comment you were going to add?
Well, I think I was so glad you spoke about that, because that's the very kind of thing that produces a wonderful result. We had our council meet there at Sisseton, and it was one of our best meetings because we went up to the top of the hill, that you've got that structure built of how people used to live 100 years ago or more. And we went inside and saw how the fire was burning, but the smoke went out. They had some very ingenious ways of lifting and directing the top of the roof. And it was fascinating to actually see how people lived, how they made it work. And I just think Sisseton is a good example of sharing to the other people of the state. They've done some marvelous things in helping people see that culture. I love it.
Anyone else have some insights or questions for Ann, but also insights into your own experiences with the South Dakota Humanities Council, and or something you might want to see them do in the future? Dun, 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 dun. Well, and let's continue. and maybe
Lee,
other,
you want to
other,
speak?
I'm
Lee,
sorry.
I had something to say, ask Ann or you. How about bringing this to light in other groups, such as, have you heard about Ollie Lifelong Learning?
I started that. Yeah, I know that one well.
That's a good place to start, but you get a different population. But I was thinking, is there some way we could find a group, a younger group, generation, that this could be, how do I say, eye-opening through, a citywide or something, or speaker. I'd really like it to get out, because when I said what I was going to, and they said, what? And I'm thinking that, is there some way to publicize it a little bit more? This is such a great group, but to bring others to the table, so to speak, I don't know what the answer is, but I just want to know if that could be done.
To answer your question, Lee, we did have a great relationship with Ollie when I was still there in Sioux Falls. Jennifer, maybe you can talk to that now, but I think the point you're bringing is, how do we deal with the younger generations? And they have business groups, and that's about it. They're home raising their kids, and they don't volunteer like they used to. And that's a challenge for the new council, I guess. That's a good question. But some of the staff might want to speak to some of that.
Jennifer's pretty young, so she might know.
Yeah.
Oh, Lawrence, you're so kind. I can say that we continue to have a really good relationship with Ollie, continuing since the previous director left, and now Thea Miller Ryan is the director there, and they always do One Book South Dakota discussions. They always host the One Book author tour if there's a possibility for them to do so. They utilize a lot of our scholars from the Speakers Bureau. So yes, we're definitely reaching them and working really closely with them. But yeah, you both hit on a problem. Well, I don't know that it's a problem exactly, but it's a challenge that we face and talk about a lot of the time, which is that a great majority of the Humanities Council audiences tend to be older. We have wonderful programs now for youth in especially elementary school with our Young Readers One Book program, and that's really helped us to meet the needs of younger children. But young adults are probably the most difficult demographic for us to reach. We work on things like, where could we market this? Are there specific places that younger adults go? Are there specific formats that they might prefer? So we try to do some of that. We also try to think about that in terms of the Festival of Books and some of our other programming. Who might they be more interested in seeing? Who would draw in a younger crowd? And we have little successes here and there, but we do continue to show the same demographics that are heavy on both ends and a little lighter in the middle. So we're constantly working on that, but I don't know that we found the perfect solution yet.
I think that comes up in so many organizations, Jennifer. It's like, well, how do we get people to become involved? You'll come up with a great idea, or you think it's a great one, and you'll organize it, you'll put all the things in place, but you don't get very many people who show up, and especially when you have something that's targeted for people that you have ascertained they need something. They have even protested that they need something, and you say, okay, let's put this thing together. It may or may not be the cat's meow, but we have to start somewhere. Will you help? And you get some people. I've never had an event where nobody showed up, but you often, you don't get many people who show up. Part of it, I think, is like people don't really have the ability to express themselves well. And lacking that ability, they are intimidated to speak up. And, it's that old story is when the monkey sees one monkey get shot, it doesn't go there, So if they want to, they may want to involve themselves, but if they see someone, quote, get shot down, in other words, that person offers something and they are dismissed or treated in some kind of way that they don't want to be treated, then they just say, not going to go there. Or they don't know what's reasonable to expect. Like people will come to a meeting, and because they and their friends have been talking about something and have decided certain words can be used and certain words can't be used, they assume everybody else knows that. Then they come to a meeting and the people use that word and then everybody shoots them down. They don't want to show up anymore. They don't want to engage. They don't know how to engage. So those are the kind of things I think we'll end up having to work on in almost a one-on-one thing. I say go to coffee, you have to have these one-on-one conversations, but we have to keep trying is the bottom line.
And Lawrence, I think you point out the really big challenge of the humanities councils. If we were formed from the national level, we need to come up with some solutions on how to help people learn how to communicate with each other. And that's, boy, I'd like to sit in on a council meeting on that discussion. That would be very interesting. Also, to ask young people, I think we need to hear their points of view. Families are different now. They don't necessarily like to just go out at night and do their civic thing. They've got kids they want to raise and be with, and it's just different now. My kids take their kids with them everywhere, and it's just needs to be that way nowadays.
Right.
I have a
Go ahead, Lee.
I have a brainstorm. It's just, I get ideas. I'm sorry, that's, I'm gonna.
That's good.
Going on the business angle, human relations, HR, they're in most all companies. They have to learn this, but is there some way that can't be passed on to workers?
What can't be passed on
way,
to workers?
In some way, if you are a human relation director in a company, is there some way that you can bring that to your workers and how they can relate to each other and use it as a helpful thing of how you work together? You also need to communicate well with each other when you're working. And looking at it at that level, if those workers are that generation.
Excellent point. And I will say that when I've talked to those HR people, they're still trying to figure that out. They will say that our biggest problem is not that people are incompetent in their jobs, but that they can't get along together. That's our problem. We don't know how to deal with each other. And I would say, if I were going to start someplace functionally in the society, I would start with the English departments, because I think the English graduates are not only undervalued, but underutilized. It seems like if communication is one of the things that we are most in need of, skills in that, I can't understand why English majors can't get jobs. That doesn't make any sense. They when you look at like whether it's business to business, people to people, children to parents, parents to children, cops to criminals, whatever, the idea is like, if we can't communicate, I think we can agree that we're in a heap of trouble. And so it just seems like someplace in there, the English majors should have a job and a well-paying job, since it's a critical one. So my 2 cents. Shout out to English majors. We're getting near our time. Our hour, these hours kind of wrap up pretty quickly. And do you have some final things or things that you would like to see? We've talked about where the Humanities Council has been, and we've talked a bit about where they are. Anything that you would like to see going forward?
Well, I think we just hit on it. I think it's just critical that with these councils in every single state, there needs to be a national discussion with all these councils on how to address this. If they were formed in order to keep our democracy vibrant by well-informed citizens, we're going to fail if we don't address this. Our democracy's going to fail if we don't address this. Why have people not been heard? Why? I mean, this released a group of people that said, finally, someone speaks for me. Where has their voice been? Why hasn't it been heard? Is it a violent voice? Is it what kind of thing it is? I think we're on the precipice of really having to dig deep and come up with some solutions. And I think humanities councils are a revenue. I mean, an avenue. So I think, but the other thing is just keep picking books that maybe bring on books that bring on conversations like this. And maybe, I would love to see 200 people on this chat today. What is it going to take to bring more people into this? These are the kind of chats people need. I love the humanities councils. I just they play such an important role, and we've seen such wonderful relationships happen from them. And we just need to keep it up on a grand scale.
Yes.
So thank you to the staff. Again, we don't do anything without their work and their involvement and their love for this. I mean, they're not making millions of dollars on this job, but, and do not fear, an English major is here. I think it will be a great bumper sticker in the future for the Humanities Council.
Well, if somebody if there's interest in bringing that conversation and, to together, people who want to talk about that, I'm certainly willing to be a part of it and even help to instigate it, because I think that if we can have, even if it's just a group of people who get together around coffee or lunch or something like that, and talk about the framework of it, I think that it's not enough to just have this conversation here. If it's going to happen, we're at the precipice of evolution or devolution. So we have to choose, one way, one slide down one side or the other. Yeah. And I'd be certainly willing to be a part of that discussion. That said, we're just at the end, and I want to thank you again, Anne, for a wonderful expose, a recap of the South Dakota Humanities Council. I hope that you'll stay even more involved with what they're doing, because I think that they can use your juice, to make the thing work, And I would like to also invite others, people, invite them to the activities of the South Dakota Humanities Council, not just this program, but they have lots of programs. They have lots of things they're doing. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. It's not just marketing in the commercial sense, but the real marketing happens when we talk to people across the fence, when we talk to people in our living rooms, when we have a chat and we just drop, hey, I'm going to this event of the South Dakota Humanities Council. You want to go with me? The invite, because a lot of people, they don't do something because nobody invited them. A lot of people are afraid to go places where they're not invited. They grew up with people. It's like, if nobody told you to go there, don't go. It's either mandatory or prohibited. And that's the world they live in.
Mhm.
So you almost have to make it mandatory. Otherwise, they think they're prohibited from coming, and you have to make them welcome. There are lots of things that we can do, and we can't do everything, but all of us can do something. And so I say, do that.
Thank
We'll
you.
look forward to seeing all of you next week, same time, same station. Be well. May the force be with you.
Good to see everyone.
Okay.
Thanks, Anne.
Bye.
Bye.